Hi guys, welcome back to Top Deck the Gathering. Blake here. We are gathered for day 3 of spoilers for Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and I'm going to try and get through these 50 odd cards faster than we got through our 40 odd cards day 1. So bear with me, we may be running a little quick. We'll see how we land. Also, I've got a bit of a glare right now, which is giving me this angelic glow, so bear with that as well. And without further ado, let's get to it. Starting off with the commons, we have Boneyard Desecrator. It's 3 and a black for a 3/4 zombie mercenary. He has menace. He also has 1 and a black to sacrifice another creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Boneyard Desecrator. If an outlaw was sacrificed this way, create a treasure token. Yeah, it seems like the trend for this set is big bodies, big toughness. They've talked about trying to slow down the limited format a little bit, and I think this is one of the ways they're trending towards doing that. And 4 mana for a 3/4 menacer, you're already not in a bad position. That's a big menace body, and the fact that you can sacrifice another creature at instant speed, there's no limit on how many times you can do this a turn to give the Boneyard Desecrator counters, and if you have an outlaw to sacrifice, you get a little bit of a bonus with the treasure token as well. Is good. I mean, I don't see this being absurd, but I see it being a worker and getting the job done in the deck you want it to. I wouldn't pick it early, but I wouldn't be ashamed to pick it halfway through the pack either, depending on how your deck's turning out. Next, we have Dance of the Tumbleweeds, which is 1 in a green for a sorcery. It has Spree. For 1 additional mana, you can search your library for a basic land card or a desert card, put it on the battlefield. Not tapped, by the way, just onto the battlefield. Then shuffle. It also has +3 additional colorless, and you create an XX green elemental creature token where X is the number of lands you control. So essentially, this reads as pay 2 and a colorless, go grab yourself a land or a desert, put it on the battlefield, or 4 and a colorless, make yourself an XX green elemental creature token where X is the number of lands you control, or 5 and a green to do both those things. I think that's where you want to land the majority of the time, being able to pay 6 to grab yourself what would be, a 7/7. I think you oftentimes feel better doing than paying 5 for what's likely going to be a 5/5. If you're really running behind on your land drops, you can play this for 3. You're ramping, and it gets the job done. I think the modality on this card is going to be what salvages it. Either of these modes, you're not over the moon about, given how much mana you have to put into the creature mode specifically. But being able to do either when you need to or both when you can, I think is really going to salvage the card more than you'd expect. Next, we have Djinn of Fool's Fall. It's a 4 and a blue for a Djinn. It's a 4/3. He has flying. And it also has plot for 3 and a blue. So you can pay the plot cost and pay it on a future turn for free. Yeah, I mean, I think the Djinn is gonna put in work in a deck that you've created around the idea of not dying early. Because 4 mana on turn 4, and then turn 5 you grab a 4/3 flyer, and you have 5 mana to do whatever you please with. That's pretty good. That's a big body. It's got a very important keyword ability there. But 5 mana for a 4/3 flyer, you're less happy to play. And you are taking off your turn 4 or a turn's equivalency to play this for cheaper. So you really need to make sure you're drafting the sort of deck that allows you to fully capitalize on the mana reduction you get for plotting this without really putting yourself in a dangerous position by skipping your turn 4 to plot it. Next, we have Irascible Wolverine. It is 2 and a red for a 3/2 Wolverine. It has when Irascible Wolverine enters the battlefield, exile the top card of your library, and until end of turn, you may play that card. It also has plot for 2 and a red. I think this card's going to play a lot better than the Djinn, for example, because you top deck this card, you're sitting at 6 mana, you go ahead and you play the Wolverine. You get yourself a 3/2, hopefully you get another 2-drop, maybe another 3-drop, or even a land off the top of your library. It's play, it's not cast, so you can get lands with it. And I think you feel pretty good. And this is one of those cards I think you also feel pretty good with if you've got a bomb or a 4 or a 5 drop, and you really don't want to throw this thing out on turn 3, and you're not being pressured by the opponent, you just go ahead and plot it. And then whatever turn you feel comfortable with having the amount of mana to cast whatever you crack off the top of your library, you get to play this for 3, or for free rather, and then you get a 3/2 body and whatever card off the top of the library that you pulled is. And that's good. I think this line of text typically plays pretty well, and having the modality of being able to do it now or do it next turn for higher benefit, I think is going to play pretty well. I think Irascible Wolverine will wind up being maybe not one of the best red commons, but one of the better red commons. Next, we have Gold Pan. It is 2 colorless mana. It's an artifact equipment, and it has when Gold Pan enters the battlefield, create a treasure token, and equipped creature gets +1/+1, and has an equip cost of 1. Gold Pan, I think, is going to be one of those rare instances where the colorless, dirtily artifact equipment does put in work. I mean, getting to throw this thing down on turn 2, grab yourself a treasure token, and play your 4-drop on turn 3 is great. You can play it in any color. It equips for only 1. I'm not sure why a Gold Pan would give power and toughness. In the past we've seen your artifact equipments that when you attack, you grab yourself a treasure. And that makes a little bit more sense given the vibe of the card. But hey, you're happy to get your +1/+1 for the lowest equip cost possible outside of 0. And on top of that, getting the treasure token is the real big game. You play this turn 2, and like I said, your turn 3, you're going to be doing something exciting, and if not then, your turn 4, you're really going to be doing something. So I like Gold Pan. I think it's going to play a lot better than it looks. It looks a little bland, but, I think it will be very consistent. Next, we have Tumbleweed Rising. It's 1 in green. It's a sorcery, and it has create an XX green elemental creature token where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. It also has plot for 2 and a green. I think this is going to be one of the more skill testing plot cards because, there are going to be the times where you top deck this and you've got something good on the battlefield already, and you've got a 3-drop and you've got 5 mana, and you get to play this and your 3-drop, and this is going to be huge for how little mana you put into it. Whatever blue bounce spell is almost always a common is likely going to make this card feel a lot worse. But, it is inherently a pretty strong ability for how little mana you put into it. And having the ability to plot it is, it's going to come up sometimes when you have no creatures on the battlefield. It turns this card from being a dead card in your hand to a card that when you draw your other creature, you can play this in conjunction with that for free, which I think is going to come up more than you think it will. But I'm not super high on Tumbleweed Rising. Its plot cost is, that extra 1 mana does hurt. And it is quite situational, but also quite powerful if you can pull it off. Next, we have Patient Naturalist. It's going to be 2 and a green for a 2/3 human scout. It has when Patient Naturalist enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards, put a land card from among the milled cards into your hand, and if you can't, create a treasure token. This, I think, is going to be one of green's best commons. The fact that a lot of times you're going to go turn 3, play this, grab yourself a land, on a 2/3 body, and that's everything you could ask for. It's ramp, and it's a creature that's quite viable. I mean, a 2/3 for 3 is understated, but not by an absurd margin. And then in the events that you don't get a land off those milled cards, you get yourself a treasure token, which, it isn't ramp necessarily in as much as you're going to have to give up that treasure token, but it is fixing. And so, there's a trade-off there, and I think you're going to be happy either way on this. And if you have any sort of graveyard synergies, you're going to be doubly so, because milling 3 cards is going to be really beneficial in that situation. So yeah, Patient Naturalist, I think, is a card to watch out for. Next, we have Bristleback Sentry, which is 1 and a green for a plant wolf. It's a 3/3. It has Defender, and it also has, as long as you control a creature with power 4 or greater, Bristleback Sentry can attack as though it didn't have Defender. I love cards like this. They really enable green to do what it wants to do, which is play bigger stuff than the opponent whilst keeping you alive to the point where you can do that. And, Bristleback Sentry is going to come down on turn 2, and it's going to rumble with whatever wants to rumble with it. in the 2-drop slot, and it's oftentimes gonna win that fight. And it just, it puts in work. It's nothing fancy, nothing flashy, but it's consistent. And once you get to your big stuff that you're gonna have in green, it becomes a 3/3 attacker, which is nothing small. It's gonna put in work, and I think this is gonna be probably one of green's better common creatures. Next, we have Reckless Lackey, which is just 1 red. You get yourself a 1/2. It's a Goblin Pirate, and it has First Strike and Haste, which is, not exactly a combo that works well together, but which are both very viable mechanics. And it also has 2 and a red to sacrifice the Reckless Lackey, draw a card, and create a treasure token. Yeah, I think this is exactly what you want out of a red 1-drop. You play this turn 1, you crack in. If your opponent has a slow start, you crack in for a couple of damage. Even if they play a 1/1 or a 2/1, First Strike really kind of just shuts that down. And the fact that once it's become irrelevant, you can sacrifice it to draw yourself a card and make yourself a treasure token, I think pays off. They've talked about trending away from maybe the necessarily faster limited formats, but if they keep printing 1-drops like Reckless Lackey, I think we're still going to have very viable aggro decks in the limited formats that we're going to see. Because, this is a lot of value for a 1-drop at common. Next, we have Mind Raider, which is 2 and a red for a 3/2 human rogue. It has trample. It also has, when Mind Raider enters the battlefield, if you control another outlaw, create a treasure token. Yeah, this is one of those red commons that you're really gonna want to include in a deck that has a lot of outlaws. As trample's nice, but it doesn't change the fact that 3/2 for 3 is understated. And that treasure token, on the other hand, is a huge difference. If you go turn 2, play an outlaw, turn 3, play your Mind Raider, get yourself a treasure token, all of a sudden you get to go turn 4, play your 5-drop, which is a really good line of play. And, the Mind Raider is going to play fine outside of that. A 3/2 with trample for 3 isn't terrible, but it's not really where you want to be at either. So just keep that in mind when you're drafting your deck. I'd look to either pick this up and draft a lot of outlaws to really make it shine, or just grab 1 or 2 of these after you've already kind of landed in the outlaw pile. Next, we have Discerning Peddler. It's 1 in a red for a 2/2 human rogue. It has, when Discerning Peddler enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Once again, this is just one of the pawns of limited. It puts in work. It's consistent. It's a 2/2 for 2, which is where it has to be relevant, and it also has the ability to rummage for you, which is, it's not to be undervalued. Again, nothing fancy, nothing crazy, but a good common for red. Next, we have Raven of Fell Omens. It's 1 and a black for a 1/2 bird with flying. It also has, whenever you commit a crime, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So anytime you target your opponent or any of their permanents, you drain them for 1, which is good, and this being on a 1/2 flying body for 2, I think is gonna be better than you'd expect. And it's not gonna do anything crazy throughout the game, but it is gonna reliably drain your opponent for 2 or 3 life if you have a lot of ways of committing crimes. And that's the deck you really want to put this in. You don't want to just throw this in any black deck, because a 1/2 flyer for 2 is fine, but it's not great. You really want to put this into a deck like a blue-black control deck, or a black-red deck with a lot of burn and, kill spells. So that's really where you want to be to make it shine. So just keep that in mind when drafting it. Next, we have Black Snag Buzzard. It's 2 and a black for a 2/1 bird with flying, and it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it if a creature died this turn. It also has plot for 1 and a black. Yeah, I think this card, on the other hand, is going to perform quite well. I mean, the fact that any sort of combat you get into, even if you trade off with your opponent for 3 mana, you're getting yourself a 3/2 flyer, all of a sudden, that's a pretty big beater in the air. And the fact that it has plot, so you can do it on a future turn where you can better orchestrate a trade-off, or even better, a situation where you kill one of their creatures and don't lose one of yours. The Buzzard, it's a beater in the air. So yeah, no, I like the Buzzard in limited. I don't see it anywhere outside of that, but it's, I think, going to be a a pretty important piece in any sort of black aggro decks. Next, we have Slickshot Vault Buster for 2 and a blue. It's a 1/4 human rogue. It has vigilance. It also has Slickshot Vault Buster. It gets +2/+0 as long as you've committed a crime this turn. See, I think this card is going to read a lot. Well, I guess not. I think it's going to read a lot like a gold card, but not necessarily a blue-black gold card or a blue-red gold card. I think it's going to read as a blue-blank gold card. You know, whatever helps you commit crimes. Because a 3/4 Vigilancer for 3, which is what this reads as, if you're targeting anything they have, or them, is good. You know, that's really hard to deal with. And I think, as bland as it looks, it's going to perform quite well in the format. Next, we have Vengeful Townsfolk for 2 and a white. It's a 3/3 human citizen. It has whenever one or more other creatures you control die, put a +1/+1 counter on Vengeful Townsfolk. Yeah, Vengeful Townsfolk is just a market improvement on a very similar card that we just saw in the War of the Spark throwback draft. It just enters with an additional power and toughness. So you're already getting yourself a 3/3 for 3, and anytime another creature dies, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Note, it's whenever one or more, so it's not like it pumps for 5 when the rest of your team dies. You only get the 1 counter for each instance of death, but that's good. I mean, 3 mana, 3/3 base stats, you're already where you want to be. Anytime anything else dies, this thing's just growing. Yeah, you're really happy with Vengeful Townsfolk. I'm honestly surprised that this wasn't printed as an uncommon, but it really just, you know, I think it just goes to show that power creep, however slow it has been, is progressively taking hold in the limited portion of the Magic community. So, yeah, you know, I'd say take these relatively early, take them relatively late. And if you need creatures in white, this is where you want to be. Steer Clear is next. It's 1 white for an instant, and its Steer Clear deals 2 damage to target attacking or blocking creature, and Steer Clear deals 4 damage to that creature instead if you controlled a mount as you cast this spell. Yeah, I mean, this card's pretty good in any white deck, but it's really exceptional in what's shaping up to be the green-white mount deck. You know, being able to cast this for 1 mana at instant speed to deal 4 damage to anything attacking or blocking is absurd. You know, that's really, really great exchange for your mana value. And yeah, no, like I said, green-white is shaping up to be maybe one of the more specialized niches of the format, but I think it'll be one of the better ones as well. So if you get yourself a couple of mounts, I'd say take Steer Clear early. Next, we have Ariette's Lullaby. It's 1 and a white for a sorcery, and it has destroy target tapped creature, you gain 2 life. Yeah, so you've got your average clunky white removal spell. It's cheap, but it requires the creature to have been tapped, so if you're on the offense, this isn't likely going to do anything. But on the defense, it plays really well. The gaining 2 life on top of killing whatever they have that you kill is pretty good, given that for their creature to be tapped, it likely attacked you, so you had to take some damage to enable this spell in the first place. I think this also falls into the camp of good, not great. You're going to run these. You'll probably maybe even run these in multiple, but you won't exactly be excited about the fact that you are. Next, we have Fake Your Own Death. It is 1 and a black for an instant. It has until end of turn. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control and create a treasure token. You know, this is, I think, the best variant of this we've seen. They've been trying to push these savior creatures by resurrecting them cards for many sets now, and it just seems that they never quite land. But you know, getting a treasure token when you bring your creature back for 2 mana on top of a pump, we're kind of starting to talk. You know, that enables you to make some other plays next turn if you're in a multiple color deck and you don't have the fixing yet. It also just kind of ramps you, and you know, a lot of times you can use this to win a combat and your creature comes back, and also you get a treasure token. And I think, like I said, this is probably the best variant of this effect we've seen for limited, and I think it, you know, I always hope that this effect will play well, and it almost never does, but I think we may have finally pushed it over the line with Fake Your Own Death, and it doesn't hurt that Tiny Bones is the image we've got to work with. He is nothing if not eternally entertaining. So yeah, no, I like Fake Your Own Death. I wouldn't take it highly, but I would take it, and I think I'd be happy running 1 to 2 of these in the main. Next, we have Razzle Dazzler. It's a 1 and a blue for a 1/2 human wizard. It has whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Razzle Dazzler, and it can't be blocked this turn. So yeah, in the blue-red deck that cares about casting multiple spells each turn, this card is going to be good. I mean, you know, it's understated to start with. 2 mana for a 1/2 is not great, but there's the line where you go turn 2, play this guy, turn 3, 1-drop, 2-drop, and all of a sudden he's a 2/3 that can't be blocked that turn. And if you continue to do that and have a decent chunk of card draw in your deck, you'll get to where you want to be. I'm not as high on Razzle Dazzler. He does the thing, but he just doesn't tangle with other 2-drops without having to put a decent chunk of work into him. And more often than not, you're going to have to wait till turn 4 before you'll be able to double spell anyhow. So I'm not high on him, but in your blue-red decks you will run him. Next, we have Bridled Bighorn, which is 3 and a white for a 3/4 sheep mount. It has Vigilance. It also has whenever Bridled Bighorn attacks while saddled, create a 1/1 white sheep creature token. It saddles for 2. Yeah, this card I think is going to be somewhat of a house at common. You know, 4 mana for a 3/4 Vigilancer, you're already okay with that stat line. It's a little understated, but Vigilance I think makes up for it. And the fact that anytime you saddle something for 2 and you crack in, you get to make yourself a 1/1 for a chump block or for, you know, just building out the board purposes, I think is really great. And they're going to be incentivized to block this guy because he's got Vigilance. You know, he doesn't go away when he attacks, and I think that's pretty big. Again, a lot of these mounts we've been seeing, especially at the common level, I've been pretty impressed with. So if the green-white mount deck doesn't come together, I would be surprised. Next, we have Demonic Ruckus. It's our first uncommon. It is 1 and a red for an enchantment aura. It has enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has menace and trample. And when Demonic Ruckus is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. It also has plot for just 1 red. This card is, I think, going to be one of the best red uncommons in the set. I would not be surprised if this card saw a lot of play in Standard, in, you know, your red aggro decks, and even your Boros aggro decks. It's just, if you don't have a turn 1 play, being able to plot this thing and play it for free on a later turn, it's crazy. You know, it hits your prowess triggers, it hits whatever you want in that regard, and it gives your creature +1/+1 and menace and trample. Like that is a lot of value for 2 mana, and on top of that, you get your card back when it's put into a graveyard. You know, I feel like the last few sets in particular, they've made an effort to make auras relevant again, because they've been irrelevant in limited specifically for so long. And, you know, I think they may have gone a little too far with this one, but yeah, no, it's going to be great. I would be pretty happy picking this early. You know, if you don't have a great rare in your start, this is kind of where you want to be. It replaces itself, it gives you good stats, it gives you 2 relative keywords, and yeah, for very, very low value. Really impressed with this card. Next, we have Baron Bertram Greywater. He's 2, a white and a black for a 3/4 legendary vampire noble. And he has whenever 1 or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 black vampire rogue creature token with lifelink. This ability triggers only once each turn. He also has pay 1 and a black to sacrifice another creature or artifact and draw a card. Yeah, 1/1 lifelinkers are no joke, and Bertram Greywater is already a 3/4 for 4. So if you get to hit this ability once, you're already in the good. You're where you want to be, and his additional, you know, line of text isn't irrelevant. A lot of times you're going to pay that to sacrifice your 1/1 lifelinker you made, or another creature, or even an artifact if you're making a lot of treasures. You know, this is very, very cheap for what you get out of it. And, you know, I haven't really gotten a stranglehold on what white black is wanting to do in the format yet. Maybe it's token creation. I don't feel like we've seen too much of that. But, you know, well, I suppose we've got the mercenaries. Anytime you make a mercenary also making a 1/1 lifelinker, that feels pretty good. That's kind of where you want to be, actually. So, yeah, no, I think Bertram Greywater, you know, he's good. He's not, you know, he's not a bomb. You're not going to play him and immediately the board is just going to shift towards your favor. But if you get to dirtle around, you know, it's where you want to be. Just try and incorporate as many token creators into your deck as possible. And yeah, you know, it's a pretty solid card. Next, we have Gold Rush for 1 and a green. It's an instant, and it reads, create a treasure token, and until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gets +2/+2 for each treasure you control. What a pump spell. You know, it's just getting yourself a treasure token right out the gate at 2 mana. It's where you want to be in all of the combat tricks we've seen in recent sets that create a treasure token. Typically, they perform really well. And you're happy to run them. But the fact that this gives your creature +2/+2 for each treasure you control, if you've already racked up 2 or 3 of them, yeah, you're getting a big bonus there. You know, it's very easy to see a game in which you've racked up 2 treasure tokens, you cast this on the 1 creature they didn't block, and suddenly you're getting through for 6 extra damage on top of the treasure token you created. I think this is going to play really, really well, and I'm happy to see Green get some combat tricks that seem relevant outside of just, you know, hey, this pumps for 3, or this pumps for 4 and gives it trample, which are always consistent and nice, but I like seeing a combat trick that rewards you up front and also rewards you even more if you've put a little bit of setup into it, which is exactly what Gold Rush is. Next, we have This Town Ain't Big Enough for 4 and a blue. It's an instant, and it has this spell, costs 3 less to cast if it targets a permanent you control. And it reads, return up to 2 target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. So, I think the most frequent line of play you're going to see with this card is your opponent goes, kill your creature, and in response you go, bounce my creature and bounce one of your creatures for 2 mana at instant speed. You know, you're going to save your creature, you're going to have to recast it, but you're going to save your creature from their removal spell, and you've put them behind on board state. You know, this card, it's expensive, but if you're playing tempo, it's good, and if you use the circumstance that I just said, it's not even expensive. You know, 2 mana for this effect is, I think, quite great. And I think it'll perform really well in the format. There are also going to be the times where you're just going to pay 5 mana and bounce 2 of their cards. And that's going to be, you know, a relevant line of play as well. Knocking out their 2 biggest blockers at the end of their turn and then cracking in while they have to, you know, make chumps or bad trades, you're going to be happy with. But again, I think where this is really going to shine is saving your creature, bouncing their creature for 2 mana. And yeah, no, I think this will wind up being one of the initially underplayed uncommons in the set, but by the end of the format will garner the love I think it deserves. Next, we have Luxurious Locomotive. It's 5 colorless mana. It's an artifact vehicle at 6/5, and it has, whenever Luxurious Locomotive attacks, create a treasure token for each creature that crewed it this turn. Okay. And it also has crew 1 to activate only once each turn. So, when it attacks, you make a treasure token for each creature that crewed it, but you can only activate its crew ability once each turn. I wonder why it reads that way then. So essentially, it's just a 6/5 vehicle, costs you 5, you crew it for 1, you get to crack in, and you make a treasure token. So, I mean, that's good. You know, it's not bad, but it is expensive to get this. You know, if you have no board state or you're behind on board state and you play this, it's a pretty big blocker for just crew 1, but it is 5 mana. Yeah, I think the versatility on this card and the fact that you can play it in most decks, given that it's colorless, is going to be its redeemer. And, the treasure token by the point in the game where you're playing this, I think is going to feel largely irrelevant. But you'll take it. Any extra little bit of value is better than none. I just, it reads strangely for activating only once each turn. So I just tap any number of creatures you control with power. Okay, so it can tap multiple creatures, and you'll get treasure tokens for each of them. But why only once each? I just don't get the once each turn thing. Maybe for if you have additional combat steps, but then it would already be accrued for the turn. Anyhow, semantics. Yeah, no, I think Luxurious Locomotive's good. I don't think it's phenomenal. 5 mana is a lot of mana, but you're getting yourself a 6/5 that requires very little in the way of crew costs. So. Sheriff of Safe Passage is next. It's 2 and a white for N00 Human Knight. It has Sheriff of Safe Passage enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, plus an additional +1/+1 counter on it for each other creature you control, and it also has plot for 1 and a white. I quite like Sheriff of Safe Passage. I think a lot of times you're going to be plotting this card. If you have a slow start or you just don't have any other good 2-drops in your hand, it's very easy to go ahead and plot this card turn 2, and then you build out your board state. And your opponent all of a sudden is really incentivized to make sure your board state doesn't get too big, or your Sheriff of Safe Passage is going to enter as a big guy. And the fact that, they're +1/+1 counters, it's not just big on account of how many creatures you have on the battlefield. I think in this set's going to matter because we have seen some, opportunities to double counters in the set so far, and I think it's going to come up more than you'd expect. But yeah, no, Sheriff of Safe Passage is good. It's a little slow if you top deck this guy and you've got nothing on the field and you're paying 3 mana to play him as a 1/1. That hurts. It's not good. But if you're playing this in a go wide deck, he could come into the battlefield very large, especially given that you won't have to pay the 3 mana to play him if you've plotted him early in the game, on your turn 2. And so, yeah, a bit of a strange card, but I like Sheriff of Safe Passage. We'll see how it lands. Next, we have Neutralize the Guards. It's 2 and a black for an instant, and it has creatures target opponent controls get -1/-1 until end of turn, and you surveil 2. We don't often see this ability at instant, and typically it costs 2 black. So it's interesting to see, just a 1 black pip, 2 colorless, instant that reduces all of your opponent's creatures' power and toughness by 1 until end of turn. I think that alone is gonna play really well. And Surveil 2 is actually really good because you lay out the board. Say it's turn 4, turn 5. You're attacking in, or your opponent's attacking you, and all of a sudden you just get to swap combat up on them. -1/-1 across the board is pretty big. We haven't seen a ton of 1 toughness creatures in this set, so I don't think it's just gonna destroy an opponent. It's not gonna act like a miniature board wipe like this variant typically does in other sets, but I think it's gonna play out well if you've built your board up properly. And by that point in the game, Surveil 2 is huge. Being able to set up your next 2 draws after this feels pretty good. I quite like Neutralize the Guards. Next, we have Canyon Crab. It's 1 and a blue for an 0/5 crab, and it has pay 1 and a blue. Canyon Crab gets +2/-2 until end of turn. And at the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, draw a card. Then discard a card. I see this as one of the biggest plot enablers really in the set because it gets you on board turn 2 with a massive toughness body. It can fight if it has to if you have the open mana, but it's an 0/5, so aggro decks aren't really getting through this guy. And it allows you to plot your turn 3 play without getting no value off of it because you haven't cast a spell that turn. You get to draw a card and discard a card, which can be very important depending on what your hand looks like. And the fact that it can become a 4/1 if it needs to kill something, and you have your 4 mana available, is really good. I think Canyon Crab it looks a little lukewarm, but I think it's going to be a big performer in the format. Next, we have Red Rock Sentinel. It's just 3 colorless mana for a 2/4 golem with Defender, and it also has pay 2, and you tap it to sack a land, draw a card, and create a treasure token. I was initially very low on this card. I think I've shifted a little bit, given that it's, 3 colorless mana, and you get yourself a 2/4 Defender. It blocks well, but again, we just haven't seen that many low toughness creatures in this set. It seems to be more of a high toughness set than usual. So it's not like it's stopping your opponent's 3/2s from attacking. So we'll see how it lands in that regard. And the ability to sack a land, draw a card, create a treasure token, it's going to come up, but I think it really hurts it that it costs 2 on top of that, and you're giving up a land. It doesn't feel great. I'm still not super high on Red Rock Sentinel, but I think I've gone from considering it as closer to an F to maybe closer to a D+. We'll just have to see where it lands in the format. It's strange that this card doesn't naturally fix like a typical variants for it would in other formats. But, I guess the treasure token gets you there, but at a pretty steep cost. So we'll just have to see on this one. Next, we have Treasure Dredger. It's 1 and a black for a 2/2 human rogue, and it has pay 1 and tap it to pay 1 life and create a treasure token. So yeah, this is a very atypical ramper. You play this turn 3, or turn 2 rather, and then on turn 3 you tap it and you make yourself a treasure token at the cost of a life. And you get to wait to do this on your opponent's turn, so this can serve as a blocker, and say you trade for their 2/2. Well, it costs you an extra life, but in the exchange you got a treasure token. And you can just do this turn after turn. So yeah, no, I think the Treasure Dredger is going to play better than it looks. Black doesn't typically get ramp this fast. So I think it'll play quite well in the format. And as always, a 2/2 for 2 at worst case is kind of where you want to be. So next, we have Brimstone Roundup. It is 1 and a red for whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token with tap. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. You activate this only as a sorcery. It also has plot for 2 and a red. Yeah, this is an interesting one because, you play this turn 2. That's kind of where you want to be with it. But, turn 3, it's kind of hard to get 2 spells off. So instead, plotting this and it counting as one of the spells that you're playing that turn and not costing you any mana is kind of going to guarantee you get yourself a 1/1. But that's a lot of investment as well for that 1/1. In a really consolidated blue-red double spell deck, I think you're going to be happy with Brimstone Roundup. Outside of that, I don't think it's worth playing at all. And even inside of it, you really have to be going hard to do the thing to justify this. I mean, racking up 1/1s is good, but you're only getting that once a turn. So, if you plot this turn 3 and then turn 4 you go Brimstone Roundup, play your other card, get yourself a 1/1, you have to then continue to do that. And it's a lot of mana investment for a 1/1 on the ground. It's not like it has evasion or any other abilities that would help it get damage through if it needs to. So a strangely what feels like cannon fodder defensive card for blue-red double spell. Next we have Requisition Raid, which is 1 white for a sorcery. It has Spree though, and you can pay an extra colorless to destroy a target artifact, an extra colorless to destroy a target enchantment, or an extra colorless to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature target player controls. I think the last ability on this alone justifies playing it. A lot of times you would be happy to pay 1 and a white to give every creature you control a +1/+1 counter. That's huge. In green-white specifically in this set, I think that's going to be massive. And the fact that you can cast this for 3 mana to blow up their enchantment that's exiled your creature and give everything a +1/+1 counter, I think is absurd. The adding artifact onto it's nice. We'll see if that winds up mattering in the format that much. But you're getting so much value out of this for so little. I think this is up there as possibly the best white uncommon we've seen so far. I think this just, it does everything, and it's so cheap. In the last format, we had Fuss, which was put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. And it was 3 mana, and it played well. So the fact that this is do the same thing, albeit at sorcery speed, but for 2 mana, and it doesn't even have to be on attacking creatures, just all your creatures get a bump. I think is quite possibly messed up. We'll see if I wind up being correct when the format does roll around, but I see this as being a great card. Next we have Take for a Ride. It's 2 in a red for a sorcery, and it has Take for a Ride, has flash as long as you've committed a crime this turn, and it also has gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. Well, they finally did it. They finally gave us a threaten at instant speed that can steal one of their attackers, use as a blocker to kill something else. Albeit at a pretty stiff cost. You do have to commit a crime on their turn. But, any instant you have that does that is going to make this card play extremely well. If you have 4 or 5 mana, and they go to combat and they swing everything, or they swing what they feel like they can swing, and you just get to kill whatever you want to with your kill spell, or just hit them with whatever spell you can to enable this, and then take whatever is most beneficial to you to block with. There are going to be times where you even they leave back 1 blocker and you want to take it and get it killed in the process to leave you open for lethal. I really like Take for a Ride. I think it lets you do the thing that almost every threat we ever see doesn't let you do. Albeit it comes at the cost of setting it up, which is kind of where I wanted it to be. I'd prefer it read the way it reads rather than read just the lower half of the card, and it has flash for 5 mana or 6 mana. This is, you're bending over backwards a little bit, but it's a huge payoff if you do. Next we have Magebane Lizard, which I think is going to wind up doing more work in Constructed than it will in Limited, but we'll see how it goes. For 1 colorless and a red, you get a 1/4 Lizard, and it has whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, Magebane Lizard deals damage to that player equal to the number of non-creature spells they've cast this turn. I really like 1/4 as a stat line on a 2-drop. I think it performs better than you'd expect. But this sort of ability in Limited, you really have to watch it. If you have a deck that's almost entirely creatures, you're fine with it, but the fact that this effect is symmetrical does hurt you a little bit if you haven't built your deck to really enable that to only hurt the opponent. But yeah, again, build your deck accordingly, but I see it especially as a great sideboard card against blue-red. And, blue-black, depending on where it lands as far as spell count goes. Just pinging your opponent every single time they cast a non-creature spell, not even instant or sorcery, say they're playing enchantments, artifacts, walkers, you name it, is big game. You just got to make sure that you're not killing yourself with this in the process. Next, we have Shackle Slinger. It's 2 in a blue for a 3/2 human soldier. And it has whenever you cast your second spell each turn, choose target creature an opponent controls. If it's tapped, put a stun counter on it. Otherwise, tap it. Whether or not this creature performs is going to depend on whether or not they have a already tapped creature. As tapping a creature of theirs, if you've set up the right combat, is going to feel good. But putting a stun counter on it is really where you want to be. Keep that in mind. Paying 3 mana for an understated 3/2, with the requirement that you have to then pay the mana for 2 spells on a turn just to tap something down isn't great. It's especially at uncommon. You're not super happy with that. But putting a stun counter on something is quite good, depending on the situation. I'm not high on the Shackle Slinger. I just think the understated aspect of it does really, really hurt it. But yeah, no, I'd like to be proven wrong. I quite like stun counters, and I think their integration into the game at large has been largely beneficial. So yeah, we'll see, but I'm going to have to be convinced on Shackle Slinger. Next, we have Rise of the Varmints. It's 3 and a green for a sorcery. It has create X 2/1 green varmint creature tokens, where X is the number of creature cards in your yard. It also has plot for 2 and a green. So I think this is a lot of the time is going to wind up being a build around card. You know, we talked about the patient, what was it, Outcaster earlier? The 3-drop, mill 3 cards, grab yourself a land or a treasure token from the yard. Is, if that card winds up being as good as I think it's going to be, Rise of the Varmints will probably play very well. You get yourself a couple of Outcasters, you get yourself 1 or 2 Rise of the Varmints, and all of a sudden, you're playing this on turn 4 or turn 5, and you're making 4 or 5 Varmints for your mana, which is great. 5 mana for 5 2/1s, or 4 mana rather for 5 2/1s. You're quite happy. You got to make sure you have a high creature count, and you got to make sure you have a way to enable this. But the ability to plot it on turn 3, I think, is actually quite good on this one, because a lot of the times you're not wanting to play this card turn 4 anyways, and being able to plot it early and then play it for free later, when it is much more beneficial to play it, I think you're going to be really happy with. So yeah, no, Rise of the Varmints, like I said, I think it's going to largely be a build around, but a pretty good one, if you can make it come together. Next, we have Slick Sequence. It's a blue and a red for an instant, and Slick Sequence deals 2 damage to any target, and if you've cast another spell this turn, draw a card. This is the best reason I've seen so far at common uncommon to be blue-red. I mean, you really want to combine this with casting another card on your turn, double spelling for all the other blue-red stuff you want to do, because dealing 2 damage to any target for 2 mana and drawing a card, you feel like you're getting away with something. This is really where you want to be. They've said that moving forward, they're going to try and have 2 staple uncommons in each color pair to kind of, build out what that color pair does. Crom is the slower iteration, and this is the quicker iteration. And, they play really well together if you can enable both of them. But I think Slick Sequence is what helps blue-red survive long enough, and what really helps bury the opponent in card advantage if you can enable it. So yeah, Slick Sequence I think is great and a really good justifier to be in this archetype. Next, we have Rustler Rampage. It's 1 white for an instant, has Spree, and for an additional white, you untap all creatures target player controls, and for another additional, or rather those colors, for another additional colorless, target creature gains double strike until end of turn. So you can pay 1 and a white, untap all your creatures, ambush them, or you can pay 1 and a white to give any creature double strike until end of turn, or you can pay 2 and a white to do both. Which I think any of those combinations are good enough for the mana cost on this. Giving any creature double strike at instant speed plays pretty well for 2 mana. And untapping all your creatures, less so at 2, but being able to untap all your creatures and give whichever one you want double strike to ambush them, I think is quite good. Especially for how low of mana cost this is, I think it's going to perform quite well. Next, we have Forsaken Miner. It is just 1 black for a 2/2 Skeleton Rogue. Forsaken Miner can't block, and it has whenever you commit a crime, you may pay black. If you do, return Forsaken Miner from your graveyard to the battlefield. We get one of these every couple of sets, and sometimes they perform great, sometimes they perform poorly. In a set that seems to be on the slower side this time around, given the mana value of a lot of the creatures, I think Forsaken Miner is going to put in a lot of work. Cracking this on turn 1, especially if you're on the play and your opponent's in a slower deck, they're in for some trouble. Being able to crack in for 2, turn 2, off the bat, you're quite happy with at 1 mana. It can't block, so it lacks some of the inherent slow the game down dirtiness that these creatures typically have. But anytime you commit a crime, being able to play just a single black to get it back to the battlefield, not even back to your hand, back to the battlefield from the graveyard, is good. And being just a 2/2 beater for 1 mana, I think is going to justify playing this card a lot of the time. Next, we have Outlaw Stitcher. It's 3 and a blue for a 1/4 human warlock. And it has whenever Outlaw Stitcher enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature token, then put 2 +1/+1 counters on that token for each spell you've cast this turn other than the first. And it also has plot for 4 and a blue. So, this card, I think, is going to land on the weaker side. You know, 4 mana, I suppose 4 mana, worst case, you're getting a 1/4 and a 2/2. So 4 mana, you're getting 3/6 across 2 bodies. Maybe not. I think that's actually probably good enough. And the fact that if you've cast another spell prior to that turn, you know, you get 2 counters on it, so you get yourself a 4/4 and a 1/4 for 4 mana. Okay, yeah, no, actually this card's quite good. Plotting it is really expensive. You know, paying 5 mana to plot this card, that's a lot. You're giving up your turn 5 to not affect the board at all. But then, if turn 6 you go double spell, then play this card, all of a sudden you're getting a 6/6 and a 1/4 for, you know, no mana investment that turn, but 5 mana and no board state on your 5th turn. That is a lot. You know, you're getting one really big body and another relevant blocker. It's a bit slow, but again, just on baseline stats, you're grabbing yourself a 1/4 and a 2/2. I think you're quite happy with this card. I think it'll perform. Next, we have Beastbond Outcaster. It's 2 and a green for a 3/3 human druid. It has when Beastbond Outcaster enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. It also has plot for 1 and a green. Again, green at uncommon is just showing up this set. You know, worst case scenario, this is a 3/3 for 3. If you have to play it on turn 3, you will. Otherwise, you're playing it in your green deck. You want to have creatures with power 4 or greater anyways. You get yourself a 3/3 that drew you a card. And being able to plot this on turn 2, I think is huge. You know, you go turn 2, plot this, turn 3, play your 4/2, and then play this for free. You got a 3/3 out of the deal. You got to draw a card. I think a lot of times this card's going to play like a Serval's Packmate in the right deck, and you know that was the best common in Kaldheim. So I think we're going to be really happy and really impressed with Beastbond Outcaster. It's an uncommon, so you're not going to see it quite as much, but I'm glad it's an uncommon, because if this guy was common, I think would have a little bit of an issue with balancing. Next, we have Intrepid Stablemaster. It's 1 and a green for a 2/2 human scout. It's got reach. It also taps to add green, and it taps to add 2 mana of any one color, and you may spend this mana only to cast mount or vehicle spells. Yeah, no, I think this card is just good enough in any green deck. You know, it's a 2 mana ramper. It's also got reach, which comes up more often than you'd think in the late game. But, you know, in the green-white deck, being able to play this turn 2, and then turn 3 play a 5-drop mount, I think it's crazy. We looked at the Gitrog monster on the first day of spoilers, and you get that with this card, I don't know that your opponent can win. You know, they can have spot removal the moment it comes down, but that is just such a massive line of play on turn 3. To be able to cast any 5-drop mount spell, you know, within reason. It has to be, add 2 mana of any one color. So you have to be able to do it with adding 2 other mana of any one color. But I don't think there are too many mounts in the set that are 3 colors that we've seen so far. So I think Intrepid Stablemaster is going to play excellent in the green-white mount deck, or the green X mount deck. Whatever you land in with mount, you're very happy to play Intrepid Stablemaster. And even in just your regular green deck, you're quite happy to play a 2/2 Reacher that also ramps you. Next, we have Nimble Brigand. It's 2 and a blue for a 1/3 human rogue. And Nimble Brigand can't be blocked if you've committed a crime this turn. And it also has whenever Nimble Brigand deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. Yeah, no, in blue-black, I think is where this, you know, it resides. It makes sense to be there. You play this turn 3, you kill their creature turn 4, you crack in, you draw yourself a card. They can't block it, so you guaranteed get the card. Otherwise, a 1/3 attacker doesn't fare well. And in this set, it seems like it's going to fare well even less, because we have a lot of high toughness creatures that can just block it for free, and kind of high power, high toughness creatures that can block it and kill it for free. So I really don't think you're going to want to play this unless you're playing in blue-black or blue-red with a lot of spells that target the opponent or one of their permanents. But in that spell, it's going to be, a playmaker. In that deck, rather, it's going to be a playmaker. Next, we have Stingerback Terror, which is horrifying. It's 2, a red and a red for a Scorpion Dragon that's a 7/7. It's got flying and trample, and it has Stingerback Terror, gets -1/-1 for each card in your hand. It also has Plot for 2 and a red. This card should, in my opinion, have been a Mythic. In Limited, this card is going to be just horrifying to come up against almost any time you come up against it. The fact that the opponent can plot this on turn 3 and then wait to plot it until it's a 5/5 or a 6/6 is great, but a lot of the times if you're in a blue-red deck, not in this format I guess, because blue-red seems to be a bit slower, but if you're in, red-black, red-white, even red-green, you're going to play this turn 4 and you'll only have 3 cards left in your hand anyways, maybe 2. So playing this turn 4 as a 4/4 flying trample for 4, you're already happy with that, and it just gets worse for your opponent. And, again, the modality on being able to plot it and play it when it's the most beneficial and will be the biggest is upside. But a lot of the times, I don't think it's going to matter. Plotting this turn 3, playing it turn 4 for free, and you get to play whatever else you want to turn 4, and you get to have a massive flying trample dragon on the battlefield is huge. This is, I think, should probably land in the Mythic zone, because seeing this thing at rarity is going to be pretty upsetting. We saw Colossal Rattleworm the other day, a great card in green, also a 4-drop, also really heavily statted, had some other beneficial ETB abilities. I don't know on this one. It's a big one, and it's, to be feared for sure. Next, we have Hellspur Posse Boss at 2 red and a red for a 2/4 Lizard Rogue. It has other outlaws you control have haste, and when Hellspur Posse Boss enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 red mercenary creature tokens with tap. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So we have what appears to be a mimic of a very similar card from Wilds of Eldraine. That, 4 mana, you played it, you got yourself 2 rats, and you were able to use those rats to, draw yourself more cards. I believe that one was a 4/4, and this one's only a 2/4, but this one gives all your other outlaws haste. So a lot of times this is just going to read as 4 mana, 2/4, make 2 1/1s with haste, and any other outlaws you control are going to get haste as well, which in Limited, that's a lot of bodies for 4 mana. It's a lot of power and toughness across a lot for very little. I think this card will actually see quite a bit of play in Standard. We have the War Leader's Call Boros deck running around, and that turns this card into a 3/5 that gives all your other outlaws haste, that makes 2 2/2s with haste, and does, 3 damage to the opponent just from ETBs. So, yeah, no, in Standard, I think this card's going to be great, and in Limited, it's also going to be great. They're going to play this turn 4 against you, and you're going to be massively on the back foot. So watch out for them. Take it early if you can. Next, we have Pillage the Bog. It's a black and a green for a sorcery. And it has look at the top X cards of your library, where X is twice the number of lands you control. Put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. It has plot for 1, a black, and a green. And it's bad. It's not good. There's no guarantee you get anything good out of this. You can't play it turn 2 to get something viable. You ideally want to play it when you've got a lot of lands on the battlefield to get more out of it, and it's just not gonna be where you want it to be. I suppose you can play it turn 2, go get yourself another land, but it's not like it puts it on the battlefield, and the plot cost doesn't really help this either. You don't want to take your turn 3 off to eventually be able to do this for free in the hopes that you maybe get your bomb. It's just not where you want to be in Limited. Maybe there will be some shenanigans with it in constructive formats, but not here. Next, we have Tai Wakeen, Perfect Shot. It's a red and a white for a legendary human mercenary. For a legendary human mercenary, that's a 2/3, and it has whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to a creature equal to that creature's toughness, you draw a card. It also has, you can pay X and tap it, and if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player this turn, it deals that much damage plus X instead. What a confusing card. So if you use, for example, Lightning Bolt's not in this set, but if you use a Lightning Bolt to kill your opponent's 3 toughness creature, you'll draw a card, because it's exactly equivalent to that creature's toughness. Say you Lightning Bolt the opponent, if you tap this first for, say, 10, say you've got 10 extra mana laying around, you tap this first, and then you Lightning Bolt them to the face, it'll deal 13 to them. Which is kind of crazy. But in the limited format, you know, it is going to be, I think, more of a cutesy card. It's a 2/3 for 2, so, you know, good stat line. But you're really going to have to line up exactly the way you want to kill your opponent's creatures to get any extra value out of this. If you have a lot of things that can go face, you know, this is a win con, for sure. But it asks a lot of you for not knowing what sort of decks you're going to be going up against, and you know, if your opponent's creatures are too small or too big, the first byline isn't going to do anything. And often I don't think you're going to have enough time to really build up the mana to make the second part of this card show up. I'd love to be proven wrong, but it seems like this one may be a little bit too much squeeze for the juice. Next, we have Lila, Undefeated Slickshot. It's a blue, and a red for a 3/3 legendary human rogue that has prowess. It also has whenever you cast a multicolored instant or sorcery spell from your hand, exile that spell instead of putting it into your graveyard as it resolves. If you do, it becomes plotted. So first off, 3/3 prowess for 3, you're already happy to play. You'll play in any blue-red deck you can. It's a good stat line to start, and it just gets bigger. If you're running that multicolored instant we were talking about earlier, the blue-red, that draws you an extra card if you've played other spells this turn, this card's absurd. Being able to play that card, ping whatever you want to for 2, likely draw yourself another card, and it just goes back to your, not back to your hand, even better, it becomes plotted. Next turn you can play it for free. Is silly. If you pick up any other instants or sorceries that are multicolored that you can run in your deck, and you play them with this card, you're very quickly going to win the game. I mean, being able to copy your spells, albeit on a later turn, for free on a body that's very relevant is just great. I think Lila's going to play fantastic. I take her early and want to build blue-red around her. If you're already in blue-red and you wind up building it towards Lila, you're quite happy with that as well. Next, we're finally on to the Mythics. We have Gyred? Mirror of the Wilds. He's Naya colors, so a red, a green, and a white for a 3/3 legendary human shaman. He's got haste. And non-token creatures you control have tap to create a token that's a copy of target token you control that entered the battlefield this turn. Yeah, we're getting a lot of really simple, streamlined, stats matter rares and mythics in this set. And we're also getting a lot of really complex and niche and just strange mythics and rares in this set. And I mean, Gyred does the thing. Like, he's a 3/3 haster for 3, but you're almost never playing him on turn 3. You know, it'll be a hedge case when you manage to line up your mana like that on turn 3. But, you know, that's not a shameful body for the requirements. And then the second ability is largely... Its viability is largely going to depend on whether or not you've created your deck to create a lot of tokens. Which is, you know, if you wind up in, like I said earlier, that Vermin deck, that's pretty good, but it also requires that you tap said creature to create a copy of a token that entered the battlefield this turn. So you have to have the other creatures available to do that. I suppose Gyred can do that as well. So say you've got 4 creatures, and Gyred's one of them, and then you Rise of the Varmints. I suppose you can tap all 4 of your other creatures to make 4 more varmints, which is, that's good, but you've also had to set up a board state around it. I think Gared's a lot of work. I think this is going to be one of the cards where if you're already Naya and you've already got a couple of ways of making different tokens, you're going to be happy to get Gared, but you're not building around this early, I don't think. I just don't think what you get out of what you have to put in just being 3 colors to begin with, it is quite worth it. But interesting card. Next, we have Railway Brawler, which does not expect nearly as much of you. It's 3, a green and a green, for a 5/5 Rhino Warrior, and it has Reach and Trample. So, I loved Colossadactyl. I love the idea of creating these big green creatures that are good on the offense and they're good on the defense, and Railway Brawler is exactly that. But he also has, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is it X. He also has, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is its power. And he also has Plot for 3 and a green. This card is terrifying. It goes off the rails quick, and the fact that you can plot it turn 4 and play it for free turn 5 and then play another creature, and double its power and toughness based off of whatever its power is crazy. I mean, if you get to play 2 creatures off this, the game's over. If you get to play 1 creature off this, it's heavily in your advantage. Yeah, no, a great card. And also, if you don't plot it, playing it as a 5/5 Reach Trampler for 5 that still has this ability is great. You're never going to be upset to play this card. You're never going to be upset to put it in your deck. You're never going to be upset to splash for this card. It plotting for just 3 and a green makes it a very, very reasonable card to splash despite having a double green cost. And I just think Railway Brawler is over the top. But it's nice to see green get some, relevant rares and mythics as well instead of Undercity Recon in Markov manner. Cards that are almost unplayable in limited. So it's nice to see that trend kind of shaping up. Next, we have Assimilation Aegis. It's 1, a white, and a blue for an artifact equipment. And it has, when Assimilation Aegis enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target creature until Assimilation Aegis leaves the battlefield. It also has, whenever Assimilation Aegis becomes attached to a creature, for as long as Assimilation Aegis remains attached to it, that creature becomes a copy of a creature card exiled with Assimilation Aegis. Man, try and say that card's name 5 times fast. It also equips for 2. So, a lot of times this is just going to read as an exclusively better 3-drop enchantment or artifact, ETB, exile target thing, which is, it typically plays great in and of itself. But if you equip this to one of your creatures and you exile something worth exiling, it becoming a copy of them in perpetuity until Assimilation Aegis disappears or until that creature becomes unequipped is great. It won't always come together that you have something that you've exiled that you really want to copy. Sometimes you're going to play this and get rid of your opponent's 3/3, and none of your creatures will be worse than 3/3s. So you won't go through the trouble of equipping it. But there are also the scenarios where your opponent plays a bomb, you exile it, and then all of a sudden you turn your dirtily 1/1 into that bomb, which is pretty high upside. So yeah, I think Assimilation Aegis is going to play really well. Next, we have Garolf the Fleshright. He's just 2 and a blue. You get yourself a 2/3 legendary human warlock. And he has, whenever you cast a spell during your turn other than your first spell that turn, create a 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature token. And whenever a zombie enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each other zombie that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So, Geralf really rewards you for plotting cards, because you get to go, say, turn 3, you play Geralf, or even turn 2, you plotted something cheap, and then turn 3, you play Geralf, and then turn 4, you go play the free spell, and then play 2 more spells. You've got yourself now 2 zombies, and the second one entered with a +1/+1 counter. Geralf expects something out of you. You know, he's understated at baseline, 3 mana for a 2/3. But if you're in the blue-red deck and you're doing the thing properly, Geralf racks up quick. I think Gissa winds up being the better of these two, given how many zombies she generates for what you have to do. But Geralf is a 3-drop, you know, and there's something to be said for that. He's quite cheap for having this much text going on. And I believe that is our last spoiler for the day. Like I said, tried to run through these a little more quickly for you guys, tried to zoom in a little bit more so our images are a little bit clearer for you guys to work with. But yeah, no, like I said, we're new to this, so any positive feedback, constructive criticism you guys may have, we're happy to hear it. You know, just leave it down in the comments. I'm Blake. I don't know if I've mentioned that in either of these videos, but now you know who's been talking to you. My co-host Dalton will be handling the spoilers for tomorrow, and you know, we'll see how we wind up landing, but feel free to leave a like, and yeah, thanks for tuning in.